Hey TwinCATers! Now that we know how to do basic version control for TwinCAT 3 projects, we can work on our projects and keep track of the entire history for the software. After working for a few months and years, you will be in a situation where you have to manage several PLCs and machines, and they will all be running different versions of TwinCAT. But we've so far only installed one version of TwinCAT on our development machine. What if we encounter a machine that runs an older or newer version of TwinCAT? What do we do if there is an older version of a TwinCAT function, say the OPC server, on a PLC compared to what we have on our development machine? What do we need to think of? If you're a traditional software developer and have been using modern build toolchains, you will find the TwinCAT way of doing it that it's not optimal. I've been working in many different projects using TwinCAT over the years, and in every single one of them, PLC developers managed to get this wrong, myself included. That's the reason why I decided to include this part. And that's the reason why you now will learn how to effectively handle this. Let's get started. We've so far only worked with one version of TwinCAT, which is 3.1.4024.14. This is the version that we've been running both on the development machine, the XAE, and on the target machine, the XAR. Now let's imagine for a moment that we're developing the software to be running on a machine, which is running the XAR for the same version of our XAE. All would be fine maintaining that machine, as the version of the XAE and XAR are matching. Let's imagine that we have to maintain a machine with an older version of TwinCAT, like 3.1.4022.32, and one that's even older than that. And what about a machine with a newer version of TwinCAT? Can we handle multiple versions of TwinCAT on our development machine? And what do we need to think of? How do we make sure that we can recompile an application that is running on a machine and be 100% sure that we get the exact same application many years in the future if we need to? If you have a version of the XAE installed on your development machine, you can install a newer version of the XAE. For example, running with 4024.14, it's fine to install 4024.22 and any newer version. All of these XAEs can be installed next to each other, which means that we can have all of these versions installed on our development machine simultaneously. What is not possible to do is to install an older version of the XAE that is older than any of the XAEs that we already have installed on our computer. So what do we do if we want to install an older version of TwinCAT than what we currently have? In this tutorial, we've so far only been talking about the XAE and the XAR, but there is a third component that's possible to download from the Beckhoff website, which is the TwinCAT Remote Manager. If you download a Remote Manager version for a particular version of TwinCAT, you can install it even if there is a newer version of TwinCAT installed on your system. This begs the question, what is the difference between the XAE and the Remote Manager? The XAE is a full-blown installation of TwinCAT bundled together with Visual Studio, the XAR, libraries and compiler. The Remote Manager only includes the latter two of these, so the libraries and compiler that you need for a specific version of TwinCAT. You can't install a Remote Manager of TwinCAT unless you already have an existing XAE installed on your machine. If you go to the Beckhoff website, you can download the Remote Manager version for several different versions of TwinCAT builds. If you need any special version that is not available on the website, you can get it through the Beckhoff support. By combining different versions of the XAE and Remote Manager, you can manage different versions of TwinCAT in your development environment. When you install a version of TwinCAT, there are certain versions of the various Beckhoff libraries installed with it. For example, with TwinCAT 4022.14, we get version 3.3.2.0 of the TC2 standard library that we have talked about in a previous part of this tutorial. If we install a newer version of TwinCAT, then newer versions of these libraries might be installed, which is the case here, where we've installed 4022.32, which is newer than 4022.14 above. As can be seen, every single Beckhoff library has been updated. The default for opening a project is that the latest version of a library that is installed on your machine is selected for that project. But it's not just the libraries that we have to think about. When installing a version of TwinCAT, there are certain versions of the IAC compiler that are installed together with it. Here you see the various compilers that are included with TwinCAT 4022.14. If we install a newer version of TwinCAT, then newer versions of the compiler might be installed. In this picture, TwinCAT 4024.14 is installed, which is newer than the version above. Here we can see that we have 2 additional compilers installed. The default when opening a project is that the latest compiler on your machine is selected for that project. I will now show you a programming demo where we start with our current version of TwinCAT, that is 3.1.4024.14, and install a newer version on top of it. In other words, we will handle 2 different versions of TwinCAT and have a discussion of what you should think of when managing your PLC software for a specific version of TwinCAT. Okay, this live programming is going to be a little bit different because we're going to use 3 virtual machines at the same time. And what we have here is 2 virtual machines with the XAE, so the full development environment, and 1 virtual machine just running the XAR, so the runtime. And all of them are based on the version of TwinCAT that we have been using so far, which is 4024.12. And what I've done here is that I've created a simple application that just uses a little bit some different libraries just to show on the concept of what happens when you run different versions of TwinCAT. Yeah, so let's open this project. Okay. What I want to show here is simply to have these 2 virtual machines and then upgrade this virtual machine with an additional version of TwinCAT. So I'm going to download the latest version of TwinCAT as of today, so that this machine will have 2 versions of TwinCAT, so 4024.12 and the version that we're going to download soon. And then we will see what will happen when we have these 2 machines developing software for one PLC, so for this PLC up here. What I have also done here is that I've created an ADS route to the runtime, to the XAR. If we go here now, we have a link to the PLC up here, so we can run and deploy our PLC software on this virtual machine up here. What I'm simply gonna do is to activate this PLC project. First, I just want to show you that I use some different libraries. Here, I use the TcLibraryVersions library, I have included the standard library and some other libraries. And this project is loaded with version 4024.12. So again, the version that we have installed here, 4024.12. And I'm gonna activate and run this project on the PLC. In run mode, yes. So let's log into the PLC and start the project. So now this is running and we can actually see it because I'm using this ntGetTime, which gets the local system time. And we can see that we get the time here. So you can see that the timestamp is increasing. So it's running on this PLC. What I'm gonna do now is to transfer this application to this other XAE environment and log in from this environment as well. So I'm just gonna log out here. We actually don't have to log out. We can even stay logged in. And I just want to show you that this is an application that's available in a Git repository. So what we learned the last time. Now we just have to clone this very same application. So we're going to do that. We're going to git clone this guy. It's this. I just created a temporary repository and this application is exactly the one that's on the repository right now, so they are synchronized. So I'm gonna clone it, and I'm gonna open it here as well. So again, the way you should think about this is that we have two computers, right? You have one computer, and then your colleague has another computer, and both of you want to work at in the same machine, or maybe you've had an application. This computer is a computer that you had 5 years ago, and now you're trying to reconstruct the very same machine if you want to do some software maintenance, for example. This would be this machine. So here it's the same. This XAE environment also has a connection to this virtual PLC, to this XAR. So we will connect to it. And now I will also do a login, and no problem. So this means that there's actually no difference between what we have compiled here and what has been compiled here, because when we log in, the XAE always compares with the target. Is there any difference of this compiled binary compared to what is on the target? And in this case, we could log in, we didn't get any pop-ups or anything, and it just worked. So this is fine, but now is the problem. What will happen if this machine would have an additional version of TwinCAT on it? So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna go to the Beckhoff website and install and upgrade. I'm gonna close this down. I'm gonna upgrade the TwinCAT XAE. So TwinCAT XAE download Beckhoff. And we can see that the latest version as of today is 4024.29, so much newer than the version that we're using here. By the way, the version that we're using so far is still the same version as from day one of this tutorial. So let's download this one. Okay, it's downloaded. Now I will just quickly install it. Okay, and now it's installed, so let's reboot this machine. Okay, machine has been rebooted. So this machine should now have a newer version of TwinCAT installed. Yeah, which it has. So this one has 4024.29 and this one has 4024.12. Now we're going to open the same project again. And then you can assume that because you have both of these versions installed here, TwinCAT will open it with the version that was installed, that it was created with. So TwinCAT will open the project with the version that it was initially created with. But as we will see, this is not the case. So what you can see here is the remote manager, and it's with this guy here that you can actually select which version of TwinCAT that you want to be loaded before you open the project. But now I just double click the project and then it automatically just selects the latest version that is installed on the machine unless you specify otherwise. But if you go here now, you can actually see that we both have 4024.29, which is the loaded one, and 4024.12. Before I show you what to do about this, I will simply log in to the target. I mean, I haven't changed the application at all. It's exactly the same application, everything is the same. But if I log in now to the PLC, so I can compile as well, of course, I can rebuild it. And then I can log in. Then we get this message, application changed since last download. What do you want to do? So there is obviously a difference between the application that has been compiled here and the application that has been compiled here, because it wants to do an online change, which we might or might not want to do. And in this case, for example, if you have deployed a machine, if you have worked with a machine and it's been delivered to a customer, then you most likely will not want to upgrade the whole TwinCAT if you just want to do a minor change in the application. And then you want to make sure that you're always able to rebuild the whole application from scratch with exactly the same version that you used when you wrote the application the first time. So why doesn't it work now? Why do I get this message even though the only thing I've done is that I installed an additional version of TwinCAT? Well, it can be two reasons, or at least two reasons, but we can get a little more information if we go to details here, because here we can actually see that, there is some implementation changed in ADS read, mem copy in TC2 system. So here this is actually quite a good window because it shows a lot about what the different differences are. But I'm gonna press cancel here, and the simple reason in this case is that there's a difference between the libraries. So if you go here to references, you can see all the different libraries that are being used, and the same here. And so for every library there is something called placeholders, which specify which version of a specific library should be used throughout the application. And if you don't specify anything, then it's per default the latest version. And what happened here is that when we installed the newer version of TwinCAT, then a later version of the library was also installed. The old version is still kept on the development environment, so all the libraries that followed with this version of TwinCAT are still here, but we also got newer versions. We can see that TwinCAT wants to use the latest version of the library by this star. So what the star says is that for TC2 TcLibraryCat, just use whatever version you have, the latest version you have. And it's the same for everyone here. And what we can see here is that, for example, TC2 TcLibraryCat has version 3.3.15.0, while here it's 3.3.19.0. So again, these are libraries that are pre-installed together with the TwinCAT XAE. So this is why we get a difference, because when we compile this application, then these libraries are also included in that executable binary, and that's why we get this difference, because it simply is it's the same with other libraries here. You see, here we have the TC2 system, here we have 3.4.24.0, here we have 3.4.25.0. So again, a newer version. But it's not just the libraries that can differ, it's also the compiler, because what Beckhoff do is that they use a compiler from Codesys. They maybe do some adjustments to it, I'm not entirely sure, but when you download a newer version of TwinCAT, then you can also get a newer version of the compiler. The compiler version is available if you go to properties here for the PLC project, compile, and then it also says here compiler version, newest version, so just use whatever version that is the newestly installed on this system, which of course can differ between different versions of TwinCAT if Beckhoff for some reason have decided to include a newer version of the compiler with a newer version of the XAE. So we can see it's the same here, of course. If you go to compile, it's the newest version. In this case, if you go here, you can actually see which one is the newest version, and in here it's called 3.1.40.24.0, while here it's the same. It happens to be the same, but it doesn't have to be. This is also something that we have to remedy, so to speak. So if we go back here, and the solution to this is to simply freeze the libraries for the particular version that you want to develop for. So for in this case, we want to make sure that when we open the project, we want to make sure that if we open the project also on this machine, then this machine should use the libraries that are delivered together with 4024.12, so the version of TwinCAT that was installed here. Then you might ask, yeah, but how do I know which version of the libraries are installed together with a specific version of TwinCAT? And the answer is you don't. There is no official documentation from Beckhoff how to do this. There is an unofficial GitHub repository that states all the different library versions of every version of TwinCAT that I will provide a link in the description below, but Beckhoff doesn't provide this. The only way to do this is to simply install a specific version of TwinCAT and check which libraries are installed with only this version of TwinCAT, which we have here, because in this machine we only have 4024.12, so we know these libraries are included with this version. All of these libraries are installed together with the TwinCAT XE, but there might also be libraries installed together with supplements or TwinCAT functions. So for example, if you install the OPC-UA supplement, the OPC-UA client supplement, then you get a certain set of libraries with that supplement, with that function, which means that you also need to keep track of which version of the supplements that I use. Because if you download a newer version of the OPC-UA supplement, for example, the function, then there might be a newer version of the libraries together with that. So it's very important for you to kind of bundle and keep track of your whole development environment, so that you can easily rebuild the whole machine from scratch if you would need to. But to solve the library problem, we go to the placeholders. And in the placeholders, that's where you can specify that you want to fix the library to a specific version. So if we go here, we can click on this guy and select, I want to freeze it to this version, because this version was the one that was delivered with this version of the XAE. We do like that. We do the same with standard. We do it with all the libraries. Press OK. And then you see that all the stars have been replaced with that particular version of the library. And it's also the same for all the dependencies inside the library. So for example, utilities depends on TC2 standard. And we can see that the TC2 standard that we included is this version. And now we can see that we also force in TC2 utilities to this version. So through placeholders, we can really kind of like freeze the library version. So that's the library version. That's all you actually have to do regarding libraries to make sure that TwinCAT is now freezed with this. And the other thing we want to do is to pin the compiler. And the way you do it is that you go to System, and then you select pin version. And what this does is effectively pin this project to this particular version of TwinCAT. If we did this, and then we try to open this on a machine with a version of TwinCAT that doesn't have this version, in this case 4024.12, then we would get a warning that says, hey, you have to have this version of TwinCAT to open this project. And then you basically get a choice. Do you either want to cancel and say, okay, I don't have this, then I probably shouldn't open this project, or you get the option to open it with another version of TwinCAT that's installed on your computer. But then you lose all the guarantees about, all the guarantees you have of freezing your software to that version of TwinCAT that you were using when you were developing the application. So you pin it. Then we save this project and we can commit it. So let's just commit all of these changes. Pinned project to 4024.12. We commit and push it. So here I use Tortoise Git, but you can use the built-in Git client in Visual Studio. It's your choice. And here we'll close the project. I'm just going to do a revert here because TwinCAT has decided to make some changes to this. So I'll just revert all the local changes. And now I will synchronize it. So I will get the latest changes from the repository. So the stuff that we just pushed on this machine. So let's just pull it over. And now if I open this project, now it's opened, and now we can see that it actually loaded the project with 4024.12. Even though it has a newer version here, it opened it with this particular version. And we can also see that the library versions here, if we compare them, are the same, because we have frozen the libraries through placeholders. So we've frozen both the libraries and we've frozen the compiler that TwinCAT is going to use to compile this application. So now if I log in, no window, nothing about an online change. It just logged in because it sees that. So actually let's log in again. Yeah, now it works. So because now it simply sees that, hey, this compiled application that I compiled here is exactly the same that's running on this machine, because it is the exact same application, because we're using the same version of TwinCAT in both sites, both the compiler and the library. And just for good measure, let's also log in to the PLC with this application here, with this XAE here. Yeah, and it works. This is basically what you need to know to make sure that you can always rebuild the application using the same versions of TwinCAT, which is quite important, because you might keep track of this in a month or two, you might remember what you're using, but if you work with many machines, and especially if you worked with 10, 20, 30 machines and over 5 or even 10 years, then this is going to get a mess. So it's always good to kind of, when you're getting close to the deliverable, the delivery of the machine, to just freeze everything, freeze the libraries, freeze the compiler, and make sure everything is committed, create releases. You can create formal releases of your software in Git and make a version of the software and put it on the machine. Then you're clean and can always go back to rebuilding your whole application. And this is important, that you just don't do it with the TwinCAT software itself here, but also with any eventual functions that you had to download to do this. So if you download the functions for Vision or for any of the communication stuff like TCP/IP, kind of just store all those files aside as well, because you're going to need those as well when you're going to rebuild the application if you would need to. But that's everything I wanted to show in this programming session. If you're a traditional software developer and have been using modern build chains, you will find the TwinCAT way of doing it that it's not optimal. It's a lot of stuff that you have to keep track of manually. In the traditional software development industry, there are automation tools for keeping the whole configuration of a build as code. You simply define what software dependencies you have with which versions, and the build automation tool makes sure to resolve all these dependencies for you. Now, the reason it's like this is not solely because of TwinCAT. TwinCAT uses codices as platform, and a lot of the issues with this comes from how it works in codices. I'm sure this will change in the future. It already has started. Thank you very much for listening. In the next episode, we will do a deep dive into ADS, short for Automation Device Specification, which is Beckhoff's middleware for communication. Auf Wiedersehen.